everybody. Welcome back to another RepTales. Today, we have our special guest, Jay-Z's Reptiles, live and in charge.
How you doing?
What's up, Jay-Z?
Hey, Jay-Z's.
Go over our mission statement here real quick. Just a reminder of why we're here. We're a bunch of cold-blooded fish keepers. We have started this weekly live stream because it isn't always of interest on our fish channels to talk about our reptiles. We want to help people who are beginners or considering entering the herpetology field. We want to accomplish this by having experienced guests like Jay-Z to share their ideas and tips and tricks. We will also be highlighting beginner reptile keepers to share their animals, questions, or concerns as well.
Cool.
Hell of a mission.
I like it.
Get up there. All right. Jay-Z, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself first?
All right. So, Jay-Z, from Colorado. I've been working with animals pretty much all my life. I actually started with fish keeping back when I lived, when I was a high school kid with my mom, and I had all of the monster fish tanks up to 500 gallons with the arowanas and the Matoro stingrays and 4 or 5 different African cichlid tanks and all the fun stuff. And I was always really interested in keeping reptiles too. Like, if you talk to anybody who's in the hobby after a while, you usually end up hearing the same story, which is, well, I'd go out and catch garter snakes and that sort of thing and get box turtles and keep them for, the summer and release them again. Similar story, I would go out like my grandmother had a big drainage ditch running in the back of her property. I would go out and catch garter snakes and bring them inside. And my mom and grandma would always go, okay, yep, that's real sweet. Okay, now just take it outside before Grandpa comes back in. And that continued on. And then once I got a little bit older, I got a ball python, a couple leopard geckos, a corn snake, a red-tailed boa. And then I started to really get into the hobby, and I tried to meet a bunch of other people and learn from as many people as I could. And then once I got married and I, bought my own place, and I started to just kind of take over the house with everything. And as I got kind of more farther into the reptile hobby and moved farther and farther away from aquariums, mostly due to a 12-hour power outage. So even my UPSs weren't able to save my stuff, unfortunately. I just started to really learn and love and appreciate these animals for as what I kind of ended up learning down the road is the reason why I really started to connect with these animals, which is that they're all very misunderstood. A lot of it is misplaced. Ignorance sounds like a really harsh word, but it is honestly ignorance and just kind of a misunderstanding that's kind of ingrained in people culturally that I kind of emulated a little bit. Like, I've never really quite fit in, and I've always been a little misunderstood. And so it was almost anthropomorphizing isn't quite word, but I would empathize well with them a lot more. And as I got started and learning more about them, it was really cool. And then I saw like the Brian Barcheks and the other crazy dudes with ponytails on YouTube that were keeping all these crazy things. And I went, I can do that. And so I kind of went head first over heels into that, which led to some probably not necessarily responsible financial decisions, as well as outdated and misunderstood husbandry practices that I am every single day working better to correct and improve, as well as speak often about those both on my channel and the podcast, and when I vend reptile shows and do public outreach programs and things like that. And so since then, started up my YouTube channel for about 2 years now. I moved about 4 hours south of Denver. And so essentially what I'm doing is full-time at this point, reptile content, social media pushes, as well as doing, the guy that comes to your school and library and Boy and Girl Scout meetings with the big yellow snake, again, usually with the hat and a ponytail. And I talk to people about that, as well as I do a lot of traveling around the country, and I talk to other people both in the reptile field as well as people outside of the field, that I have learned that guy with the yellow snake that shows up at your library and school, that's where a lot of people get their spark, that first interaction with animals. And that can lead to all sorts of different things down life, where they end up being zookeepers or biologists or wildlife management people or all these other crazy things. So I talk with people who run, apiaries that have the size of 100 different hives in their large apiary, or a guy who works with wolves and elk populations in Yellowstone, that all kind of got their start in the same place. And so that's kind of what I do.
Very cool.
Nice.
Awesome.
And the ponytail's a requirement.
Right.
I made a funny shirt that has gotten me some flack with some ball python people, and it was going to be one of my like merch shirts, and it was how to be a pet tuber, and it was number 1, have a ponytail, number 2, have a ball python, specifically a spider ball python, number 3, try to be a pretty girl, and number 4, use an iPhone. And I was like, I got most of those.
You're not a pretty girl.
So you don't have any fish at all now, JC?
I actually do. I have 2 aquariums now, and I'm actually in the works of getting a little indoor pond for my big building. And I have just 175 with an Oscar and a Synodontis catfish, and I have a couple koi that I'm growing out to put into my pond. And then I just have a small little South American Tetra tank with neons and a couple other small little guys, and then a yo-yo loach because I had a lot of snails.
Oh,
Cool.
nice.
That's awesome.
I want to get into your outreach program
Okay.
and what it involves and what you do. And
Okay. Well, so similar to like a lot of like the private like presenters that do like the birthday parties and in school programs and stuff like that, I do those as well. Just actually came back from one at the Air Force Base in Colorado Springs. I did one for a big group of kids there. But primarily what I do is I go to several of the reptile shows, and I essentially act as an educational coordinator. And both myself, as well as I coordinate with other vendors or other people in the hobby, and I get together and we figure out a presentation about different subjects. And over the course of a weekend of that Reptile Expo, we put on educational programs where, for instance, I'm much more of a snake guy than a lizard or a tortoise guy. And so I'll put on a presentation about, rare and unusual reptiles around the world that a lot of people haven't even seen or even heard of. Or I'll do one about ball python genetics, or I'll do one about boas from around the world. And then I'll work with other people who, like, there's a guy in Colorado Springs who has done a absolutely insane job of raising panther chameleons, which chameleons in general is difficult. And then in Colorado, it's almost an insurmountable thing to be able to keep those well with the crazy high and low temps, the really dry air. And he's done a great job. So he'll do that. Someone who does isopods and living soil systems and bioactive systems, I'm starting to work really closely with them. Another person who has even crazier different snakes and reptiles than I do. There's even Colorado Gators, which is a wildlife park down here in southern Colorado, who in the state of Colorado, we're not legally allowed to move alligators around or keep them, which is a good thing. But so sometimes they'll loan me like a caiman that I'll go out and I'll do like a presentation about caiman, where they come from, what they're like, why they don't make good pets. And so that's what I try to do, is I will kind of cater my presentations to the audience, whether they're more reptile aficionados, where I'm going a little bit more in depth about, average rainfall of Timor Island, where this particular subspecies of of gecko comes from, to talking to people just getting into it, where, okay, how would you do this setup, or how would you do something similar to that? So where a lot of what I do, especially on YouTube and stuff, is definitely more geared towards the beginner to intermediate person. And then at the Reptile Expos, I will do usually kind of that kind of entry level again, and then a little bit more higher up, I guess. Sounds a little elitist, honestly, and I never try to come across that way, but that's usually the way to do it. It's a little bit more in-depth conversations, I should say.
Right.
Is there a lot of reptile expos in Colorado?
It's starting to come back. For the reptile scene, I guess you could say, in Colorado has been kind of weird. We have some weird, wonky, exotic laws. A lot of stuff that's a lot of gray areas, and we had this one person who was very big in our community for a number of years do some very unethical things that led to a huge animal welfare thing. It got everyone on the radar. In fact, USARK came out to Colorado, and we all went up to Department of Agriculture, and there was a big roundtable. We all talked about some new exotic laws that they were trying to pass and impose on people. That was actually going to make it to where, like, if you had a pair of bearded dragons, that was going to require a $700 year permit fee, multiple inspections per year, and all this other crazy stuff. And so Phil and everybody from USARK, they came out there. We all sat there, we talked, and we tried to educate the people that just didn't quite know what was going on, what the reptile hobby is, or even what these animals are, because they're not dogs or cats.
Right.
And that was a whole thing. And so now we're kind of bouncing back from that, as well as bouncing back from COVID. And I work pretty closely with two event coordinators who do two different ones. They do multiple shows around the year. So this year I've done 3 in Pueblo, 2 in Loveland, which is in northern Colorado. There'll be another one in Pueblo, another one in Loveland. I'll be out of town for the one in Denver, unfortunately, and there will be another one in Colorado Springs that I'll probably be coordinating with it there as well.
Is there, do you know if there's anything that goes on in Wyoming?
As far as I know, no. In fact, it was a really big thing. The one that I worked with the most, actually, what they try to do is go into places where they don't have as large of a presence, like, Georgia or St. Louis or even Denver, that have kind of concrete cemented areas, and they try to give people who are not only keeping or breeding reptiles, but also a place for people who want to get into it or learn more, have a chance to go to those. And so the one in Loveland, Colorado, which is a little bit further north of Denver, it makes a really good kind of in-between point between the people in Wyoming, because most people are in like the Cheyenne, Laramie area.
Yeah, I live in Laramie, so
Yep.
Loveland is like maybe 2 hours from me.
Yep. And so a lot of people were coming down from there. And then the Pueblo show, which is down in closer to southern Colorado, still north of me. A lot of people from New Mexico, a couple people from Texas, and from parts of Arizona that were actually closer to than like Phoenix. They were coming up and they were appreciating being able to have shows there. And in fact, this one Reptile Expo that I work with, they did one in El Paso last December. And it was the very first time that a Reptile Expo had been there in over 12 years.
Wow.
And the reptile community there, that everyone who heard about it came out, were just super appreciative and so excited to learn about everything.
Yeah, I'm kind of interested in the Loveland one because, like I say, it's not that far from me, and I don't like driving through Denver, and I wouldn't have to go to that one.
Fair.
Because Denver is insane.
It's getting there, yeah.
Very familiar with Loveland. I had an aunt and uncle live there. So. Furloughs Aquatics, is Daisy going to the show in Daytona this month?
I will not. Those big shows, I usually am not able to make it out there. And with the cost of gas and airfare and everything else right now, my travel had to really cut down. I normally go to all of the NAR BC shows, the ones in Texas and Illinois. I usually try to go to those, and I've had to cancel all those. And now we have an issue with a couple cars to where I may not even be able to go out and to do the Texas and Chicago shows this year. So unfortunately not. I'm kind of stuck with local this year, but hopefully next year I'll hopefully be able to make it out there to a few more of those.
What's your favorite reptile that you're keeping now?
That is the hardest question that I can ask. Like, I was actually a chef for 15 years before I stopped doing that to do this full time. And I would just get asked, "What's your favorite dish to make?" And I would say, "I don't know. I'm sorry." I can tell you that the reptile that really got me excited the first time was a red-tailed boa. I love them. Some people kind of give them, like, reptiles in general are just much more intelligent than anyone has ever given them credit for. And some people, even who keep them, kind of poo-poo the boa constrictors. But I have some of the craziest stories of how intelligent that they are, and I just love their personalities and how they move. And I do like the genetics aspect a little bit too. Like, I like to play mad scientist and play with all the different morphologies and genetics and stuff to a degree. But I have such kind of a wide, very generalistic approach to a lot of things, to where it's, I like ball pythons, and I make fun of people who have ball pythons, and I'm one of them too. Like, I have about 100 of them.
Why? What is the running joke with people who keep ball pythons?
They're pet rocks. They don't move. They're
Right.
really easy. Like, once you learn more about reptiles and proper husbandry keeping practices, they're very easy. They don't move a whole lot. They're not fast. And then once you actually start, and like with any animal, you start to learn body language. Just like people, we give off a lot of signals and a lot of language just by talking. We don't have to talk to give off a vibe. Reptiles do the same thing, and it's very easy to keep and handle and work with ball pythons. Whereas, I also have one reticulated python, and she's probably around 15 feet, and she is so smart and so sweet. Never gonna breed her because we don't need more retics. But just how smart she is. Like, she lived at my mom's house for about a year, and even though she never interacted with her unless I was there cleaning or feeding her, which was, I was there twice a week, and once a week, once every other week she was there, she still remembers my mom's voice. Like, she'll hear the decibel level and the tone of my mom's voice, and she'll start cruising the cage and wanting to come out. And I don't know why, but she remembers that. She knows between me and my partner which one of us is working with her. Like, oh, is Becca going to be messing with me today? Sawed off. Oh, it's Dad. It depends on her mood for the day, but it's just really fun. They're so different. It's almost kind of like where, angels and urarus, they're in Oscars. Those are cichlids, but they're not the same as any of the ones from Malawi or Tanganyika, where they're just, not only their water conditions are so different, just their attitudes and general personalities are so starkly separate too, where it's hard to pick one or the other. I know that was a really rambling answer from red-tailed boas down, but
No.
And you focus on snakes right now, or do you have other? I heard you had iguanas.
Oh, I have a bunch of stuff. I try to limit because number one, I'm just one person, and it's hard to be there properly for that many animals by yourself, as well as outside of the regular routine for some of the care and husbandry needs. I know I would end up forgetting or neglecting them, so I don't do a lot of arachnids. I don't do a lot of amphibians. I know how to, and I know enough to be dangerous, but I don't actually keep them because I know better than to put myself down that path. But I have a few different geckos. I have a couple of different types of iguanas, keeled-bellied lizards, green keeled-bellied lizards. I have a couple different types of tortoises. What else am I playing with? It's mostly snakes. I'm definitely a snake guy.
Okay.
Oh, I have an old tegu. He has cataracts.
Oh man, that's my dream pet.
He's an old boy.
What is old for a tegu?
Well, when I got him, he was 9, and that was 7 years ago.
Okay.
So he's 16 to 18 years old-ish right now, depending on how truthful the guy I got him from was. But he's really slowed down. He doesn't eat as much. He's not as fast as he was. As far as we know, around 20 is around the average for tegus.
Okay. So they don't do cataract surgery for tegus, do they?
It's possible. It's very difficult to find a knowledgeable reptile vet, and we're actually pretty spoiled here in Colorado. We have a really great one.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, she's out in Aurora, which is east of Denver, so it's still a 3.5-hour drive for me if I have an issue. But I absolutely will. I make the drive.
Yeah.
If there was a reptile that you wanted removed from the hobby, what would it be?
Red-eared sliders.
Agreed.
Okay.
Like it's the responsible keeper of me wants to say reticulated pythons, honestly, and hots, any venomous reptiles, just because there's so much responsibility and money that goes into properly keeping those animals.
Yeah, but not hognose snakes.
Hognose are fine.
Yeah.
But the guy that had the cobra get out, and the people that like free handle hots on YouTube, they just kind of make us an easy target. But honestly, red-eared sliders, they're popular because they breed fast and breed young, and they're everywhere. Like at Phoenix Herpetological Society, they're actually a rescue. They have a surrendered/rescued population of about 500 just red-eared sliders.
Wow. Yeah, I have I think 4. No, and I got 5 now. So people surrendered their red-eared sliders, and it's such a shame.
Yep, that's yeah.
I have 2 that I've had for 14 years now.
Mm-hmm.
Since when I got them, they were like hatchlings, and they were about the size of a quarter. And believe me, they're big now. They're big. They're in a 100-gallon tub.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I've learned that essentially any turtle that has the word pond or slider in it, just avoid it.
You're far enough south that you probably have a lot of native reptiles. What do you have there in the area?
So where I am at, because I'm actually in a weird place where I'm at a lot higher elevation, and I'm kind of surrounded by mountains, we actually don't have that many here where I am currently at. It's mainly plains garter snakes, and prairie rattlesnakes, Crotalus viridis. If we go about 2 hours one way or the other, east or west of us, we start running into bull snakes east of us, wandering garters, terrestrial garters, long nose, ground snakes, hog nose, Massasauga rattlesnakes. And then if we coach whips, saw a really big bright pink coach whip the other day when I went out herping.
Oh, wow.
And then west of us, we get a different type of gopher snake. We get the midget faded western rattlesnake, a lot of garter snakes again. And then also out east of us, we have a lot of tarantulas. The Oklahoma or Texas or Colorado or Arizona brown tarantula, they're all the same thing. We have a huge population of them out in our southeastern plains. And it's actually a whole event that happens every year where they call it the tarantula migration. But it's actually just the sexually mature male tarantulas that are all going out and looking for the ladies.
Oh, boy.
And during certain times in the fall, and there's other places like Arizona and California that have them too, where it's also a thing, but you'll just see them not in the hundreds, but you'll see upwards of 30, 40, 50 a night just crossing the road, or if you go out with a flashlight.
Well, now I know where not to go.
I'd be inside my house, doors closed.
It's actually really fun. It's really cool. They really don't care about people. They are on a mission, and that's what they're going for. And they just kind of really ignore everything else.
Okay. I think I saw a horror movie, and they probably took advantage of the migration because that's what they were all doing. And I'm like,
Right.
if they were walking around like they didn't even exist, and I'm like, oh no.
Yep, I know where I'm not going to go visit.
So from that round table, what kind of outcomes did you come up with, or something that you could bring into the hobby with you?
Oh, for the when the U.S. Ark and everything had to come out? Mostly what that dealt with was just more reasonable restrictions and guidelines that would require outside policing, essentially. Like we kind of have in Colorado, there is a state group called PACFAS, the Pet and Animal Facilities Care Act. They've been around for a long time. They mostly monitor people who are breeding dogs and cats and birds because,
Okay.
as we knew, that can be something that people can be very irresponsible with. So I totally understand their need for that. But when that issue occurred with that person who also was doing stuff with dogs and cats, they decided they need to be part of all aspects.
Is this someone that was famous or something?
She was very big in the reptile hobby here in Colorado. She had multiple stores. She put on the largest reptile expo a couple times a year. But she was one of the largest rodent producers in the state. But she also bred a couple different types of pure breed dogs and a couple cats or some other stuff.
Wow.
But,
Okay.
got way too big, stopped caring. It was about the money for her, and then stuff went down south very quickly, involved fires and all sorts of really bad stuff.
So they were going to make laws because of one person?
Mm-hmm. So essentially what happened was they've designated different aspects of rescues, boarding facilities, groomers, all of those things already existed, but now they exist for like fish stores and
Okay.
reptile shops that require special permitting, licensing, and inspections separate from already being just like an animal facility. That also included private breeders in their homes.
Okay.
Because while a lot of the animals you see in like Petco's and PetSmarts and stuff come from basically like 3 big places, like out in Florida, Texas, and California. Local hobbyists do quite a bit of stuff. Hobbyists, large-scale keepers, small batch breeders like myself, we're doing between 10 and 100 clutches or litters of reptiles a year, depending on the species or whatever may have you, which is small scale. I know it sounds huge, but versus, 4,000 that does come from places out of Florida, which that's a whole other thing. They were mostly wanting to have reasonable guidelines about the number of animals coming, going, produced, the sizes of enclosures, the actual science, I guess, we'll just kind of throw out there the science of their husbandry that is in there that does not necessarily pertain to dogs and cats. Like there are some reptiles that literally will never drink water, and in fact, if there's too much humidity in their enclosure, they'll die. Or
I've never given water to my Uromastics. Not once.
Yep, that's one of the examples. Chameleons, a lot of geckos, they won't drink standing water. And a single reticulated python or Burmese python can have 60, 70 eggs. A large boa can have 30 live babies.
Wow.
And they had restrictions on like 10 for any. And so they just, between a lot of the private keepers, the store owners, and USARK, we just kind of tried to get a bit of a middle ground to where, while yes, I believe that there needs to be some regulation because we've now proven that we're really bad at it, doing it for ourselves. Some needs to be there, but reasonable and educated and kind of open to evolve as we learn, because this is a very new hobby too. People, the fish community has been going strong since, the 60s and 70s, if not earlier.
Right.
The reptile it didn't take off until 1988 when the first albino Burmese python was proved out by Bob Clark. And then in 92 when ZooMed made the first UVB bolts. That's when it really exploded for the reptile hobby.
Oh, okay. That's interesting.
Yep.
What are you breeding? What reptiles do you breed?
I'm actually not breeding nearly as many species as I keep. Right now, ball pythons, red-tailed boas, boa imperator's, Dumerals boas, a few different colubrid. So I don't know how much you know. I know that you guys do. Some of you do keep reptiles, so colubrid snakes, pink snakes, horn snakes, those type of things. I do keep quite a few different species of those. I'm just now starting to breed them. In fact, I produced a clutch of rhino rat snakes for the first time this year, which was absolutely crazy. I didn't think the male was in there long enough to do anything. But when I very first, like when I saw the other ponytail people, I thought I like boas better than ball pythons, and so I went, I'm going to be the guy in Colorado, and there was even a couple other ones out there, but I was going to do it right. I was going to do it better. I was going to be the #1 boa guy in Colorado.
Right.
And there's a few zoonotic diseases that are highly transmittable in certain species of snakes that most people in the United States don't test for. So, and boas are a big susceptible species to those.
Okay.
So my boa prospects took a hard left, similar to the aquarium thing that we talked about earlier. So then I went, well, ball pythons. I understand genetics. We'll do some ball pythons. So I started to collect oddball ball pythons here or there. Ones that looked a little different, or ones that looked a little unique, or really pretty. And then I learned about the wonderful, crazy world of colubrids and eyes and colors and shapes, the eyes of which my eyes have never seen before. So that's why I have boas and ball pythons that are 10, 15 years old. And then most of my colubrids, other than surrenders or rescues, are all under 5.
Okay.
Yeah. Cool.
Way cool.
Do you ever get reptiles online? That's primarily in like Repticon, and I've had reptiles almost 4 years, and it was just when a fellow fish member passed away, and I took his ball python, and I've got about 18 or 19 reptiles sitting around me here now. But that was the start with the ball python. But some I get online, some like at Repticon. Do you ever do that, or you just get locally, or?
I do everything. Excuse me, sorry. I have quite a few animals that I've gotten from people I've never met online through. Sorry, took a big drink of water. There's a site called Morph Market that was originally started for ball pythons. Sounds like you guys know about it. That's branched out into a lot of the other species that gets breeders from all over the world, outside of like the big producers who just kind of send mass everywhere. Gives them an opportunity. It's allowed me to connect with a lot of those people to get to know them on a more personal basis, as well as I do get some animals locally. Hey, the reed frogs are going. So just kind of a little bit of everything, as well as sometimes I do get surrenders a lot, to where someone can no longer take care of it, or are moving and they can't bring it with them, or something like that. And in fact, that's actually where my big 11-foot red-tailed boa came from. Was this woman contacted me and said, she had surgery and she is going through divorce and is moving, and she just can't continue to handle her. She's also getting up in years and all this other things, and she used to have a whole lot. Now she's down to just the 2. She only wants to keep 1. She had an 8-foot Burmese python and then this red-tailed boa, and I went, how the heck are you keeping a Burm and you can't hold on to the? Yeah, it turns out she weighs 120 pounds. She's at least 10 feet long.
Wow.
And not overweight.
Wow.
Biggest boa I've ever seen. Her name is Cupcake. I didn't give her that name. And she's now gone with me to a few different outreach programs and reptile expos.
Nice. She must have good personality then.
Very cool.
Awesome.
You were talking about getting a specialty. I've always wanted to be specialized in breeding in northern blue-tongue skinks.
Yep.
I want that to be my specialty, and I'm like, it's just not in my cards. It's just not in my cards.
There's actually I would argue the #1 blue-tongue skink for both northerns and easterns in the United States is a guy in Colorado.
Really?
Have you heard of Reptile Mountain TV?
Yeah.
It's a YouTube. Yep, that's him. He's here in Colorado.
Was he at the round table?
Nah, I hadn't met him yet. I was a baby in the hobby. At that time, I had like maybe 40 animals.
Okay.
I was pairing my first ball pythons, but it was just something that was so startling, and knew that it could cause huge problems, both for, the financial aspect of it, as well as, when all these big things pass, what happens to the animals? They get released or they're euthanized. and I don't like to be any part of that. So
No.
anything that has to do with responsible keeping and education, that's what always has been a big part of
Yeah.
my motto, I guess.
That's what I'm trying to. I'm upgrading one by one all of my enclosures for a better size because I was under the impression that 40-gallon breeder was pretty much the best size for most things, and it's not. So I'm trying only because I do YouTube.
Yep, exactly.
My awareness was like, wow, okay.
Mm-hmm. And that's something that, you know, being on YouTube and, you know, being present on social media, it puts you out there.
Yeah.
And I try to be open and transparent to where the exact same thing. I thought that, you know, a 41 quart rack is great for adult ball pythons. That's all you need. And that, you know, the little crested gecko setup, that's all you need for most geckos. Not the case. I admit that a lot of the animals I acquired through the years were under that idea, and I'm doing my best to upgrade it. And I talk about, you know, when I talk about the different species, like I have a whole series called Species Spotlight, where I talk about individual species of reptiles, not necessarily how to keep them, but just about them. And I will recommend that, you know, for a bare minimum size, much bigger than anyone thinks. And in fact, there's a video coming out tomorrow where I talk about reptile racks.
Okay, you're going to talk about your enclosure that you have with your iguanas. That's that 8 foot by 4 foot massive.
I've made a video about it. Yep,
Okay.
it's on there.
That's awesome.
I've done tours of the whole facility as well since we moved over. I made a whole series out of it. But yep, just like you, you know, under the idea that this was okay, it's what everyone else was doing. That's what all of the information was saying, and still does.
Right.
Say.
Right.
It's, I mean, just like with you know, with aquariums, how many PetSmart still sell red belly pacus?
Yep.
And it's we know that it's not correct, and so I try to be a more moderate voice of reason of okay, this is what it was. Let's baby step towards better. And also, here's why they can't really go away.
Yeah, and I'm glad I learned the way I learned and how I learned, because it's keeping me from being very judgy. I can't stand those judgy people that say you have to do this and you have to do that.
Yep.
Like
the popo.
Yeah.
Well, I don't do care guides.
But being compassionate about it and understand, especially the mom who's got 4 kids and somebody brings home a chameleon.
Yep.
Like, and for somebody to attack them online and saying, "Why didn't you do your research first?" Like, wow. Like,
I know.
Inappropriate.
Yep.
It's very helpful, huh?
So I'm glad you do the same kind of thing. It's good to know. I think there needs to be more compassion out there to get the message across about the habits and habitats of different than yelling at people or saying you have to do this.
Yeah.
Is there any reptiles you found out in the wild that you've kept?
I am not a big fan of wild-caught animals. There is a whole conversation that needs to be had and is had about wild-caught animals in the hobby. As you guys also know, how many wild-caught animals are in fish keeping. But personally, I'm not a fan of it if I can help it, especially if I know more about them. There's a lot of animals that are being threatened through, you know, human encroachment and things like that. I do have a couple of wild-caught bull snakes. They are not legally allowed to be sold in the state of Colorado. They were given to me, and they act as education animals. I had one that had exchanged hands like 5 times before I got him. He had been in captivity for about 8 or 9 years. We don't know how old he was, and eventually he finally succumbed to a few tumors. But I have another little baby one that was nearly ran over by a truck in a very large truck stop down here in southern Colorado. And he had him in with another animal. And that's a big thing where you do not re-release reptiles or amphibians if they've been kept in captivity, and especially when they were around other ones. Don't do that. That's big no-no.
Yeah.
So I like to go out and herp, which is where I go out and I'll go looking for reptiles, amphibians, and tarantulas. And I just like to see them. There's have you heard of Park? They're a group that it's a national group but there were individual states where they will take surveys of different areas, and they will check, temperature and humidity barometers, and they will get ground temp readings, and they will satellite mark where they find individual species, and they will count the number of species that they can find in these areas. And I've done my best to try to make it out to them, but I haven't been able to yet. But they work through iNaturalist, which is a way that anyone can mark and GPS tag with their smartphone where they find stuff. And they do an amazing job of just documenting all these really cool native species, and it lets people learn more about them. But as far as wild animals go, I like to go out. I like to help rattlesnakes across the road. And beyond that, that's really it. I just like to take pictures and go, that's really cool.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm learning more and more. My Chinese water dragon was wild caught, and now I'm learning more and more about captive born and bred, not just field raised or whatever. That's pretty much wild.
It is that's a whole thing, like the farm raised or the farm born. Yeah. It's just an area where there are, and they know where it is.
Right. It's hard to understand those things when you first come into the hobby, because you fall in love with an animal, you get it, you bring it home, then you start learning, and then you feel like a hypocrite. You can't get on your high horse. That one's a wild caught. My Russian tortoise, I'm sure, was wild caught.
Oh yeah, no one breeds Russian tortoises.
Right.
But that's actually why I will say that people should take the aquarium approach to reptiles, to where you get your setup ready, you do the water testing, you make sure all of your stuff, your salinity and your pH and everything is dialed in before you get that species of fish. You do the same thing with reptiles. You watch 8 or 9 reptile YouTube videos, you read reptile magazine articles, you go onto the Facebook groups, you learn as much as you can about that species, and then you go get it.
Right. Yeah, I got my setup all ready for a Jackson chameleon. It's just sitting here. No chameleon.
Yep, that's okay.
But when the right chameleon comes along, Bob, I'm on it.
Yep.
You'll know it. You'll know it.
Yeah.
What would you recommend besides the 2 that are always recommended for beginners, the ball python, and what's the lizard? I can't remember. I have a gamma, so I always forget what the other one that's more common.
People recommend ball pythons and bearded dragons a lot.
Bearded dragons, yeah.
So this is where
you recommend?
This is where a lot of people that aren't in the hobby yet yell at me a lot. I don't recommend either, honestly.
What do you recommend?
I recommend a year-old to adult corn snakes or king snakes.
Awesome.
They are manageable in size. They are very forgiving for their husbandry. Which means that their temperature and humidity requirements aren't nearly as bad. They don't eat very large meals. They don't have to eat very often. And even though they are colubrids from North America who will brumate, they can still live very long, healthy lives without brumating them, which is a whole thing that most people don't even think about when they start keeping reptiles. Very handleable. King snake's a little bit more food motivated, but that's why I say that is the best beginner reptile. And obviously, I'm a little biased because I'm a snake guy. And then for lizards, even though everybody wants to play with the lizard and have the TikTok videos of them, the bearded dragon ringing up and pulling a grape out of their mouths and stuff, leopard geckos and crested geckos, and honestly, crested geckos over leopards, because of their requirements and their ease of care and diet. That there's a big difference, I think, between a beginner and a good pet. Good pet, ball python, boa constrictor, a lot of Asian rats.
That's my favorite.
Yep, or even bearded dragon. But bearded dragons they need a 4-foot enclosure at minimum as adults. Mm-hmm. Everyone keeps them in 20s and 40s. They absolutely require UVB lighting, which needs, with now the exception of this new brand that I'm actually an affiliate with, guilty, shameless plug, VivTech, new LED.
Go ahead, say shameless plug. Tell us what it is.
Yep. So VivTech is a group of a guy. His name is Ryan McVeigh and his wife Erica. They actually worked for Zilla for years and years and years, part of marketing and product development. And she is a world-renowned exotic reptile vet tech. they started to work with zoos both in the United States and in Europe about better lighting, because for a long time, ultraviolet light, that's required. That's a big thing that's being talked about more. Like, we need them for corals and things. We need them for bearded dragons and lizards. Well, hey, if it's alive and isn't a troglodyte and lives in a cave system and never sees the light of day, ultraviolet light's probably good for everything. And so LED light puts out a separate wavelength of light called UVC, which actually is harmful for proper bone development and metabolisms of reptiles. And so actually, if you have an LED light over your reptile, you're actually slowly killing it. But they, for a long time, were working on a way to figure out how to still have an LED light that didn't put out that particular wavelength. And they finally did it. And so now they started this new company. They left Zilla, called VivTech Products. So like Viv for vivarium, that they now have LED UVA lights of different outputs of strength that they will last upwards of 3+ years versus 6 months to a year of the other ones. It doesn't quite have the large
and UVA mixed together.
Yep, UVA and UVB, because they absolutely do much better with both. They're working on cool automated timers and all this really fun stuff. They're working on ones that can output that could be used better for like large tortoises and cyclura and monitors and lizards, where you can have it, on your ceiling and you'll still get it on the ground. Right now, even with their stuff that's putting out higher wavelengths, 18-20 inches is about where you get the most, and then it really starts to dwindle down. Yeah. So they're working on those type of products, and then as well as like Acadia is always a really great one and things like that.
Well, we just started getting Acadia here in the United States. We didn't have it for a long time, right?
No, you had to specialty order, and I'm seeing them pop up more and more at specialty stores and like standard brick and mortar stores too.
Cool.
Now, are they just doing lighting, or are they doing enclosures and other things?
As of right now, they're only really doing lighting and ways to kind of monitor that. They are working, and there's even an app where if you hook it up to like a little monitor and like a little hub where you can control everything on your phone, and they are actually working on, and Ryan, if you're watching this, they're actually working on an app to where they are taking all this data of what they're like naturally. So like, in like the New Caledonia Islands where crested geckos and gargoyle geckos are found, they will have their rainfalls and humidity things and everything for all the times of the year. It'll all be preloaded into this app to where you can get your VivTech lighting system, your VivTech monitoring system, and misting system. You just hit crested gecko and you're set. Except for refilling the misting system and then, double checking your LED light in 3 to 5 years.
That is so cool.
And they're actually really hard wearing. You can put them in an actual cage. Like I have a little Aki monitor, which is a small little dwarf monitor from Australia. They only get like, 20 inches or so at the longest. He destroys bulbs. He'll rip basking bulbs out. He'll pull a UVB bulb out. That can be right in there. You can hammer a nail in with those lights.
Oh, wow.
So shameless plug. And I have a little promo code too. I'm not sure where it's. I'd have to look it up. You get 20% off too.
Okay. I do love watching the videos where people actually, like, I think it was Dave Kaufman went out to New Caledonia and showed us. Mm-hmm. And that's where I learned most about the Uromastyx, because I thought sand was a good idea, a desert animal. And he showed, no, it's not sand. You want to put it on like rock and hot rock. So I find those kind of videos where people swimming with the cichlids in Lake Malawi, like I listen to those people who've been there, took pictures, and you can see in real life, like, not that I have to emulate everything but I want to get closer, at least simulate what I can.
Well, that's the right track. It's so you take your base knowledge, which is essentially the commercialized version and info that's thrown at everybody, and then you go onto YouTube and you go onto Facebook and you talk to people who keep them, and then you also go on and then you watch people like Dave Kaufman and people like that who actually go out to those places and talk to the people there. Yeah. And then you can piece together your own conclusion based on more than one information source, which is how we should do it with everything, but specifically with keeping animals.
Would you be interested in maybe doing like a focused special like guest thing for us sometime later on when we
Sure.
get requests for like, okay, these are the top 5 questions for a beginner. Would you be interested in doing that so that we have an expert,
Yeah.
to answer those questions? And
Absolutely. Yeah, no problem. And I mean, even if there's anyone in the chat that's asking questions, I don't mind answering them. Yeah, no, absolutely. I'll always put my, and again, it's I'm an expert. I've just been doing it for a while, and I talk to a lot of people. I will tell you how I have done it and what has worked for me. It's not necessarily the only way to do
Right.
it. It's just, yeah.
BJ Palmer has a question. What do you think of the gargoyle geckos, JZ?
I think they're really cool. They're part of the Rhactodactylus, so they're the new Caledonians. Crested geckos for a long time were part of that genus. Now they're not.
One of my favorite words, Rhactodactylus.
Which I probably butchered. People
I
yell
like
at me
it.
People always yell at me about my pronunciation of Latin names
imagine
all
that.
the time. But I think they're really cool. They make great pets. Care is very similar to that of the leopard. Not the leopard. I always do that. The crested gecko. It's just a little bit bigger. You can give them a little bit more of a protein-based diet because they'll absolutely eat other lizards as well. But like the little powder diet that you give a cresty, they do very well just on that. I usually do, because I do have one. I used to have a pair, but my old female died. But I usually will vary up the different flavors. Usually that they contain insects, as well as I will throw in crickets. I try to, when I go in at night, because even though I have a whole room set up better for those cooler weather animals like the crested geckos, the Asian rat snakes, and the gargoyle geckos, I still go in there at night if I need to do any additional spraying or crank up a humidifier. And while they're out there, I'll try to tongue feed them like mealworms or things like that.
Okay.
Just to kind of vary their diet, because varied diets are definitely something that we're just now really starting to tap into outside of more than just like a bearded dragon.
Yeah.
Why are we always yelling? Has Jay-Z ever done anything for television?
So technically, yes. I've been on the news a few times. Just a couple weeks ago, I was kind of like independently contracting for Colorado Gators. Did a little presentation at a dinosaur museum in a town a little bit further up from us, and the local Colorado Springs news was there. I was on the news for that. I've been on the news a couple times for similar things, and there's been a few small little videos and films and documentaries that I've been a part of as well. Like there was one that I can't remember the name of it. It was about fear, where people who do crazy, dangerous jobs, which at Colorado Gators, it's a wildlife park where they have a large amount of alligators and crocodilians that are almost every single one is a rescue or a surrender or a confiscation from someone keeping them illegally or not well, not only from Colorado, but from all over the country. But when you have that many animals, just like working with snakes or lizards or fish, sometimes they need to be medicated. They need to be looked at. And so what do you do when you have a pond filled with 40 alligators that are all 8 to 12 feet long? You still got to go out there. And so they happened to be there filming while I was there learning and working with these guys when I was learning to work with the larger adult alligators. And they just happened to be, their crew was there. And so I ended up being part of that whole part of that small documentary. It also involved rodeo, like cattle people, not like, I don't know if it was necessarily like the people who ride like bareback or do like the actual like rodeos, but the actual people who work with the animals every day, who aren't necessarily out there like riding them necessarily, but still working with those very large and powerful animals.
Right.
Ones that, and just like a bunch of other just like very high danger jobs and careers and things that need to be done. But yeah, mostly just the news and a couple small things. I've been interviewed for Animal Planet for a couple different shows, but my segment always gets cut. So,
That's awesome.
I'm not compelling.
That's funny.
Don't know about that, but you're definitely knowledgeable and interesting to listen to for sure.
Yep. Whenever I go to the reptile expos, and I don't. Oftentimes, I don't even have my own animals that I produce with me. I'm there just to do education. But when I do have them, I'll sit there and I'll talk to people and I'll say I'll talk myself out of a sale all day, to where I would honestly talk to someone for 5-10 minutes, and they have a better understanding of either what they wanted to get or more of the animal they were really interested in. And even if they don't get one from me, at least I know that the animal that they choose to get will be going to a more knowledgeable home. And
Okay.
sometimes they'll come back and they'll find me, or they'll find me on Facebook after the expo, and they'll contact me again, which is always great. But I'm more about education and talking to people than I am about making money. Although it is kind of nice when it can sustain itself.
Yes, when you can do both. Yeah.
All right.
I have a dumb question. Imagine
No,
that.
you're fine.
It's really more a point of clarification.
Sure.
You're talking about, I get it about not releasing like an injured snake or something like that back in the wild. But what about talking about red ear sliders? You know, they're a dime a dozen, literally, they're everywhere. Would they not be able to recover or to resume their role in the wild if, say, they had an injury or they were just hatched in, you know, in a home, and then they wouldn't instinctively be able to care for themselves?
So more than likely, they probably would. They're very hardy animals. But the problem with the red-eared sliders specifically is that they're invasive to most of the United States. Red-eared sliders aren't naturally found east of the Mississippi other than small populations. They're really not. But they're in all 50 states, including Hawaii and Alaska.
Well, that's crazy.
And they're not supposed to be there. And so that damages ecosystems. So that's why when you ask the question, what could be removed, that's why I said red-eared slider, because they are the most trafficked and invasive and released animal.
That's why I would say pleco for the fish keeping hobby.
And then the other issue is diseases. There are diseases that, especially if it is in contact with another animal you have, that they could have resistance to because they were wild caught and they have a resistance to that disease, but they can still passively carry it or whatever it is. Or in the case of amphibians, chytrid fungus, where that can release and decimate entire populations of wild animals. And so you don't want to necessarily have an animal that may or may not have come in contact with another animal you have, or even utensils or tools that you use with other animals that you didn't properly wash or sanitize in between them.
Right.
And then possibly introduce that contagion or disease or infection or fungus or whatever may have you into wild populations. I would say that if you ever come across an injured animal, and this is going to be, you know, the natural guy of me, is just do a quick Google search of a wildlife rehabber in your area and just take them to them.
Well, I used to volunteer at a wildlife rehab
Yep.
Years ago, and turtles and squirrels and those kind of things, the easy things for what I went in one day a week and cared for. But like the turtles that had been hit, you know, by a car or something, they would just patch them up, and once they were healed, they would return them, you know, back to the wild. So.
Yep, that's honestly what would happen a lot. Like, there's been a few times where I found snakes that were caught in a glue trap, to where work it off, quarantine in a different building where no other animals go to. They get their own set of tools. I don't even usually work with them the same day.
Right.
And then once I know they're good to go, I put them back right where they were found, or very close to it, in the close of possible coming back in contact with people or humans again or anything like that. But for, like you said, like specifically turtles that are crossing the road, they get hit by cars or someone picks them up. Yeah, absolutely, you can re-release them. Just don't take them home if you can help it, unless you have something like that where it's entirely separate, where I literally have a separate sink, a separate house, whole things of tongs, buckets, spray bottles of chemicals and cleaners that only are for that room.
And the least amount of human contact, the better.
Exactly.
Interesting.
Very sad. Well, this was awesome. Thank you so much, JZ. And I'm glad you said you'd be interested down the road coming back again, because this.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. That's I can do a little bit here and there, a little bit of everything, in all honesty. And then as far as common husbandry questions about specific species and stuff, I'm always happy to answer. A lot of it's probably already on my YouTube, but hey, I don't mind spreading it to other people that are also interested, that are just getting into it. Aquatics and fish keeping is where I got my start, and actually a lot of people kind of did the same thing too. And so they kind of unintentionally, at least initially, think, oh, this is easier than fish, and that's not necessarily.
No.
I think that moving forward, excuse me again, that the herpetological hobby is going to catch up with fish keeping, assuming we don't get everything that happened just recently, with the act that was just passed, that we luckily were able to get all that out. Assuming big stuff like what's happening in Florida, where ball pythons and boa constrictors might be illegal.
And tegus, right?
No, well, tegus are now illegal as well, but there's a whole list, including ball pythons, African cichlids, angelfish, bullfrogs, tree frogs. Those will potentially all be illegal to be kept in Florida, to where it can be a huge upset in the hobby. Right. But assuming we can manage to be able to stay, ahead of that and maintain a good positive image of the hobby moving forward, that we're going to hopefully be able to catch up with the aquatics community, to where we take much more care and are much more aware of the actual environments of those animals versus what we've known this whole time, which is just heat rock, carpet, light, done.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen that happen quite a bit lately, that the reptile community is catching up with the aquarium community on the look of their enclosure.
Yeah.
Yep.
Spending more time and details on setting up their enclosure. So,
yep, it's actually kind of done this weird circle where originally back, when it was mostly just like, wild caught stuff and people just doing like trades and here things, it was, you take a scoop of dirt from the backyard, or that's literally, it was that. And then as breeding and genetics and morphs and ball pythons, the best and worst thing to ever happen to the reptile community, we got super clinical and sanitary and clean and very minimalistic. And now it's coming back around to more naturalistic and more, and even going above and beyond to where, as you said, specific things and better enclosures and better awareness of their needs of these different species of animals, which is really great.
Right.
Which is what we need as well. And to stop free handling venomous.
Aside from Hogma.
I always have to throw that in every time I get invited to a podcast. I always end up taking my little campaign. I always
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
I have one question left for myself that's kind of my pet peeve.
Sure.
You feed frozen thawed or live?
I'm sorry, what?
You feed frozen thawed or live?
So, as a whole, whenever possible, I do choose to feed frozen thawed. Babies getting started, stubborn holdouts, animals that don't eat rodents specifically, I will do live. But whenever possible, I always do frozen thawed. There's a whole conversation, argument to be had about, like use of muscles and, having their brains work better to actually be able to hunt that prey animal and item. But the other part of that conversation is that prey animal has the ability to get away, not in the box. Regardless of how big or nice we keep it, we still keep them in boxes.
Yep.
That animal's stuck there, and a cornered rat, even when the snake is refusing it and the rat actually starts to eat the animal, a cornered rat can still kill a snake or even a large lizard. It can do a lot of harm and damage to that. So I personally think that feeding frozen thaw for the less risk of damage to that animal, because that also can lead down to, like broken teeth and scratches and infections and abscesses down the road. And then just taking your animal out and playing with them and exercising them. That's more mental stimulation anyway.
Right.
So that's my personal preference.
Awesome.
A+ from me.
Yep.
Yep, same.
All right. Well, guys, we've been going an hour and 5 minutes.
Uh-oh, we went over. Wow, that was good.
Like I said, I'll talk. That's something that's what I did. And then when I started to do my own podcast, other people who did reptile podcasts were like, I don't know how you can just talk for an hour by yourself, because I'll do just kind of like catch up podcasts where it's just me and I'm the only one talking for over an hour. So that's the one thing I'm good at.
All right. Everybody, if you're not subscribed to JC, Why Are We Always Yelling has posted this link.
Well, thank you, Jimmy P's Aquariums.
Yep.
His
Jimmy.
link is also in the description. Make sure you're subscribed to everybody on the panel. Their links are all in the description. Thank everybody for coming out tonight. Everybody in chat, lurkers, replay crew, my mods. Wouldn't be possible without each and every one of you. So love y'all, and we'll catch you next week. Our guest next week is Dan the Turtle Man.
Actually, I think I've heard of him too. That'll be cool.
Yeah, it's going to be fun.
Jay-Z, any final words?
Don't think so. Just, enjoy reptile content, enjoy animal content in general. If you ever hear anyone talking about fish, birds, ferrets, whatever, just spread the love about them. That's what I like to do.
Awesome. Any final words from the panel?
No, this was a great
No, that
show.
was a great show.
Mhm.
Very interesting, very informative. Although there's nothing in Wyoming, which is kind of disappointing. But
Yeah.
But always, these guys will ask me, they'll ask everybody what shows are coming up, and I always just say, guys, I live in Wyoming.
There's a guy in Idaho, in Idaho Falls, that's trying to start up one. But as far as I know, I don't think there's anybody in Wyoming that's doing it. It's mostly Fort
Yeah,
Collins.
there's not much in the way of even fish stores or anything else in Wyoming. Wyoming is just kind of like,
Yeah. Because unfortunately,
Wyoming is like a cut and paste to Colorado, but they forgot to add people. So,
All right.
but no, it was a really good show, and thank you very much for coming on. I really enjoyed it.
Yes,
Yep.
thank you.
Right.
Thank you, Jay-Z, very much. All right, everybody. We'll catch you next week.
Sounds good.
Bye.
Bye, guys.